Mark Schwartz, enterprise strategist at Amazon Web Services, award-winning CIO, and author of The Art of Business Value. He brings decades of experience in IT leadership and digital transformation. Today, he'll share his insights on how to harness emerging technologies, reshape culture, and turn innovation into results. Please join me in welcoming Mark Schwartz to the stage.
Hi, everyone. So I am here from Amazon Web Services, AWS. You could say I've come from the cloud. And I've come from the cloud to be here with all of you, so thank you for being here. I have the most fun job at AWS. I'm part of a small team of former C-suite executives of large organizations. So the people I work with are like a former CIO of Coca-Cola, a former CIO of McDonald's, CFOs, these amazing people. I get to work with them, and our job is to make AWS customers happy, basically. That's what we do. We try to help leaders of organizations, often large organizations, with the challenges in digital transformation that are not really technology. So things like cultural change and organizational structure, governance models, investment strategies, business cases. My favorite topic is bureaucracy. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk about bureaucracy a little bit. Who here loves bureaucracy? I suspected that would be the response. We engage with our AWS customers to see if we can sort of get them over the hump in digital transformation, when they hit an obstacle. What I want to talk about today is connected with that. The way I view what we do, really, is that AWS offers these great new technologies, but then the question is, how can businesses actually get the value out of those technologies? In some cases, maybe it's not a business, you're not looking for business value, it's a mission-driven nonprofit or a government agency. So the question is, how can you get the mission value out of the technology? And I think it's not obvious how companies get in their own way and prevent themselves from getting that value. So that's what I want to talk about today. And I want to do it by telling you a few stories from my experience before I joined AWS, and a historical example. We're going to do a little history class today. So before I joined AWS, first of all, I published 5 books on IT leadership and digital transformation. I tell some of these stories in the books. But right before I joined AWS, I was the CIO of US Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is in the Department of Homeland Security. I think I heard somebody already starting to laugh, which is very appropriate. USCIS, you might be familiar with us. We're the agency that is the nice people in the US government. So our job was to approve applications for green cards and naturalization and things like that. You don't want to confuse USCIS with those nasty people at ICE who arrest people. And from what I understand now, they arrest them and send them to like Eswatini or Sudan or something. You don't want to confuse us with the people in the airports who are the really grumpy, grouchy people who look at your papers and say, how long will you be here? That's CBP. So USCIS is the nice people who do the green cards and stuff. And I was the CIO there. And we did a very big digital transformation at USCIS. And I want to tell you the story a little bit because it will explain where I'm coming from and why I'm saying the things that I am. So our digital transformation started one day when I was watching television. And I was watching television, and there was President Obama at the time. He was giving a press conference, and he announced this thing called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. his very famous immigration initiative, and he announced that it was going to be rolled out in 60 days. Now, this was a big shock to me because, of course, it was my people who were going to have to roll it out. And this was the first time I'd heard of it. And I knew a few things that the president did not know. I would have told him if he had asked me, but he did not ask me. Useful pieces of information, one of them is that for us to do anything involving IT, even the smallest change to any IT system, it took 18 months. That was the quickest we could do anything. And we were going to have to change 25 IT systems to roll out DACA. So all of you can do the math. It was obviously impossible to do this in 60 days. It was obviously impossible, but we did it because he was the president and he said so. It's a little bit of advice for you, maybe. I don't know. If the president says you're going to do it. But the thing is, it wasn't good, right? We had to cut corners. Maybe we didn't secure all of our systems very well. Maybe we had to renegotiate agreements with contractors on unfavorable terms, you know. Basically, it was as bad as can be, you can imagine, if you're in an IT organization. But we somehow did it. But it made us realize that things weren't good. You know, immigration is a very political thing in the States, obviously. And there's a lot of change, and it happens very quickly. It's not surprising that the president would suddenly announce something and say, in 60 days, we're doing it, right? We just had to expect that that was going to happen a lot. So we said to ourselves, we have to be more responsive. We can't take 18 months every time we need to do something. And which is obvious to everybody in the world except a government agency, of course. But we said, how can we fix that? It takes us now from the beginning of a project to the very first release that we do, 18 months. Somehow we're going to have to shrink that. And that was our transformation. We said we're going to shrink it. We did step by step until finally we were making changes 3 times a day on the average for our biggest IT systems. So in a way, that's how you could measure what our transformation was. You could imagine in a big government agency, it's not so easy to do that. We had to change the way we did security, the way we did contracting, oversight, and how did we report to Congress, and you know, just everything had to change in order for us to get there. Why did it take us 18 months to do any simple change? Policy, government policy. It didn't exactly say you have to be really slow, but it more or less said that. It said to do anything in IT, you have to write 87 documents. By the way, I was the first person who counted 87 documents. Some of them were like book length. And you have to have 18 gate reviews where you get permission to move on to the next stage in the project. And 22 people have to sign off on everything. And this was the official policy from Homeland Security. We had to do everything that way. So what did it take to actually get something done in IT? And here's what it looked like. I know, so all different organizations are represented in the audience. And I'm sure none of you have a system like this, so don't worry about it. I'll just tell you the way the government did it. So we would have a need for change, let's say. Something would happen one day. The president would announce DACA, or there would be a terrorist in Times Square, or you know, something else would change, right? How did we get from there to where we released an IT product that would actually solve that change? Okay, so what were the steps? It looked something like this. The first thing that happens is you realize you need to do something. First thing you do is nothing. because you can't just do one thing, right? Government projects are multi-billion-dollar things that take years, and so you can't go through all of this just for one need. So you got to wait until you have enough problems, and then you can start doing something. Okay, so you have enough problems. All right, so here's where we realized we need to do something, and then we get enough problems, and then somebody writes up a document, a mission needs statement, to justify why we need to do something, and that goes through an approval process, so that takes a little time. So we've approved sort of the vague business case, and what happens next? Well, we start to write requirements for it, and we put it through like a steering committee, or somebody's got to approve it. So it takes a little while to get it approved, and once it's approved, then you finish collecting all the requirements, and then you have to get the 22 people to agree that those are the right requirements. And the 22 people are all very senior people in the organization. And so they don't have time to review the requirements. So it takes a long time before you get approvals. And so finally you get the approvals, and then you start to plan the project. This is a true story. We had one project where there was a Gantt chart for the project plan. The Gantt chart was 60,000 lines long, and it took a team of 20 people full-time just to make changes to the Gantt chart as things changed. All right, so that takes you a little while. And then maybe you go out and get some infrastructure for your IT project, and that takes you a little while. And then finally, somebody does something. That's the technical part, and that goes here. And then you would have testing and security, and you would have to train users and document things and negotiate with the union, because we had a union. And so you finish, and then here's where you get your result. And does anybody even remember where I started? Okay, here was where you had the need. And the result was way out there somewhere. So this is why we tended to do 5-year projects, 10-year projects. We actually managed to waste on one project $1 billion because we didn't realize it was off course until 5 years had gone by. Even in the government, wasting $1 billion is not considered good. So why do we do all that? Like, why is this crazy process in place? It's in place because we need to mitigate risk. And the idea was always, well, if you plan well, that's going to reduce your risk, and so you need to plan. You need to write 87 documents. One of them was an integrated logistical support plan. Why? But anyway, that would mitigate risk. So here's all this process for risk. And when we looked at it, I can't absolutely promise that this is the right number, but we think for every $1 we spent actually creating a product, we spent $10 mitigating the risk of that $1. So there's something a little bit insane about that. I know none of your companies do this kind of thing at all. You might have a friend whose company has this problem. But the government, this is just normal, or it was before I got there. And we fought to figure out how to compress that timeline by looking at it with sort of a lean lens. Where is there waste in all of this, where we could eliminate it? But the thing I want to point out, the technical part, if you remember, it was about here, right? And it was about this big. So the thing that we realized is, let's say we use a new way of doing the technical part. We've got AI, or we've got DevOps, or something like that, and we speed up the technical part. How much does that change the big picture, right? We go from this to this, or something like that. You don't actually get the value of those new ways of speeding things up, because that technical part is embedded in this business process that is just sort of monstrous, okay? And that's one of the things that we work with organizations to try to help fix. Why does it get like that? One of my colleagues used to say, It's sort of like if you were climbing up a mountain and you're a rock collector and you find all these interesting rocks on the way, and you pick up a rock and you say, that's a cool one, and you put it in your backpack. And then you go on a little more and you find another rock. Well, that's an interesting rock, and you put it in your backpack. And you do that again and again, and by the time you get to the top of the mountain, you can't move anymore. This is exactly what would happen in the government and then lots of other organizations. Anytime something goes wrong, you have to add another policy or add another audit step or a check or something to make sure it never happens again. That's just another rock. So you wind up with this impossible process. All right, I want to switch gears, and I want to tell you, if it's not obvious already why this is bad, I'm going to try to explain why. And the best way to explain it is to tell you all about Napoleon Bonaparte and his invasion of Russia in 1812. Do some of you know this story already? Anybody, any history buffs? There are so many lessons you can take out of Napoleon's invasion of Russia, but I'm gonna give you one. So here's Napoleon. He's assembled the biggest army ever, 500,000 troops. And they're on the border with Russia. And it really has to do with digital transformation. Just trust me for a minute, okay? So they're on the border of Russia, and the French army crosses the border into Russia, and the Russian army retreats. And the French move forward a little bit more, and the Russian army retreats again. And the French army, and this just keeps happening. You know, they just keep retreating. And finally, the French army is almost in Moscow, which is their target. All they have to do is cross the river over there. There's a town next to the river called Borodino, and that's where the battle's going to be. The Russians dig in there, and they're going to have a big battle. And Napoleon's happy, you know, because he wants to fight. And a couple of strange things happen on the way to this battle. So the French army is coming up the main road to Borodino, and they notice over there there's a fort called Shevardino, and they say, oh, what the hell, let's capture that fort before we have the big battle. So they capture the fort, and now the French army is here instead of coming up the road, but both sides have already made their battle plans, and they don't change them. Neither side is agile enough to change the plan, and so the Russians are acting as if the French are still coming this way, the French are acting as if they're still coming this way, and the battle is all confused because it doesn't make any sense. Napoleon has already told all of his generals, here's what I want you to do, you stand here, you do this, you do this. None of it makes sense anymore. All right, so the battle starts, and Napoleon is at Shevardino on a hill, and he's watching the battle, and he's giving orders. This really has to do with digital transformation. So he's giving orders. How can he give orders when he's a mile away on top of a hill? And once the battle starts, there's just smoke and dust everywhere, and he can't see anything. So how does he do it? He has a messenger, and the messenger, he's at the battle. He figures out what's going on. He gets on horseback. He gallops to where Napoleon is. He explains the situation, and Napoleon tells him what to do, and he goes back to the troops, and he tells them what to do. And there is one, this story is told in War and Peace by Tolstoy, and Tolstoy makes fun of Napoleon. And he tells a story where, at one point, the messenger comes galloping up to Napoleon and says, we've captured the bridge over the river. Do you want the troops to cross? And Napoleon thinks about it, and he says, yes, have them cross. I'll meet them on the other side. And the messenger gallops back to the battle, and he tells everybody, Napoleon says, cross the bridge. There's just a few problems. One problem is the Russians have recaptured the bridge in the meantime. The second problem is they've burnt the bridge. There is no bridge anymore. And so the troops, of course, ignore Napoleon. So all day long, Napoleon is giving orders, and nobody is paying any attention to what he says. It just doesn't make any sense. So really, it is digital transformation. Think about Napoleon's problem here. What's the problem? The problem is that his lead time for making a decision is really long. He has to wait for the messenger, tell the messenger has to go back, et cetera, et cetera. So his lead time from when something changes on the battlefield to when his order is executed is really long. On the other hand, things on the battlefield are changing really fast. Very short lead time. Capture the bridge, burn the bridge, you know, troops move here, troops move there. It doesn't work. It doesn't work if the lead time of change in your environment is very short and your lead time for making a decision and implementing it is really long. It just doesn't work. Napoleon doesn't actually have control over his army because of this problem. So if you go back to our government policy, here's where something happens on the battlefield. Here's where something changes. Even though all of this policy was there to avoid risk, to reduce risk, the truth is that it has completely lost control over being able to affect what's actually happening in the world. Things are changing really quickly in the world, and the people who formulated this policy in order to reduce risk, what they didn't realize is that they've added all this risk because now they no longer have control. They thought 87 documents would give them control. Truth is, that took the control away from them because things are changing fast. So this is all about risk and how do you manage risk? And especially at this moment when AI has appeared and it can do all these amazing things for us. We know it extends the capabilities of IT organizations. They can do all these new things. And we need to innovate with it. We need to figure out what we're going to do with it. How do you manage innovation in your organization? Some of you are in smaller organizations. It's a little bit easier. Big companies, how do they manage innovation? Problem is, innovation is risky, right? You're doing something new. It's always risky. So you manage your risk by being careful with your innovation. Does this sound familiar? So you're going to manage risk by being careful. I asked a lot of companies, how do you do this? How do you encourage innovation in your organization? Generally, there are two basic answers, right? One answer is we have an innovation board, and anybody who has an innovative idea, they present it to the board, and then the board decides whether to fund their innovation. So that's one approach, because that manages the risk, right? Second approach is we have an innovation team, and they're in charge of innovation, and we give them special permissions to ignore all the bureaucracy and try out ideas. Okay, that manages risk too. Neither of those approaches actually makes any sense when you think about it. First approach, innovation board. Who's on the innovation board? Experienced people, right? Experienced people who are responsible for the status quo. They created today's situation, and now they're deciding which innovations are good ideas. It's not going to work, right? Innovation team. They're allowed to innovate. Nobody else is allowed to innovate. That's a problem right there. They're allowed to innovate. They're allowed to ignore the bureaucracy. Why don't you take away the bureaucracy from everyone else and get a lot more innovation? Neither of these really works. At some point, I became responsible for this very big failing project. This is the one where we lost $1 billion. And at some point, you know, the Trump administration was coming in, and everybody figured they're going to want to blame somebody for it. So they told me I was in charge of it. And first thing I did, the obvious thing, right? I asked the leaders, what should we be doing differently? You know, like you're in the middle of this project. What should we do? And invariably, each of them gave me great ideas that were innovative ideas on what we should do differently. And I asked them the next obvious question, I think, which is, like, why haven't you been doing those things? You're in charge, right? And this was individual meetings with these people. They all had these great ideas. And when I asked that question, they said, do you know how hard it is to get approval to do anything new? In fact, we counted, and there are 17 people who could say no to each of those ideas we just talked about. And by the way, Mark, you're one of them. To say that this caused some self-reflection would be an understatement. You know, I had to think about this. It's like, yeah, you're right, actually. A lot of us are managers, and what do we do when somebody comes to us with an innovative idea? We start saying things like, yeah, well, have you thought of this? And have you thought of that? And did you talk to this person and talk to this person? And what if this happens? And what if this other thing happens? That's what you say as a manager when somebody comes to you with a great idea. Why do you say that? Because it's risky. And your job is to see where the risks are and mitigate the risks, you know? Point out all the risks. It doesn't work, right? Yes, you have to manage risks, but the wrong way to do it is to shut down ideas before they even get started because you're so good at managing risk. So I had to think a lot about this, right? I do this. I know I do this, and other people I know do it. There's a way to fix it, actually. And the way is if you can reduce the risk of innovation so much that you don't need to do that, then you can just let innovation flower. You know, you can let people do things freely, try out their good ideas, and see what happens. So we have some tricks available to us that let us do those kinds of things. One is the cloud, is a great example. Cloud lowers risk of innovation because if you need some infrastructure to try out your innovation, you just spin it up in the cloud, try it out. If your idea doesn't work, just get rid of it and stop paying for it. So how much have you spent? Almost nothing, right? The risk of trying out the innovative idea goes down. If your innovative idea includes AI, in the old days, you would have to go and hire PhDs from, you know, some AI program and get them infrastructure and spend a year or two building models and whatever. That's risky. Today, you snap your fingers, you have some AI capabilities in the cloud. Try it out, see if it works. Doesn't work, you get rid of it and have very little risk. AI itself can be risk mitigating, right? You have an idea, try it out with an LLM, try it out with a model, see what you come up with, make some prototypes, you know. Again, all of these things reduce risk of innovation. And as I said, this is all about, it's kind of neat. It's all about risk and how you're managing your risk. So now we have these techniques to manage risk down, and the impact of it is if we learn a new way of managing, we can allow employees to take risks when they have good ideas. We can almost coach them. We can say, try it out. How will we know if your idea is good? You know, let's try an experiment. And we can take advantage of that as a way to speed up innovation, to be able to innovate fast enough that we're actually keeping up with the pace of change in the environment. And at the same time, we know we're controlling for the risks. So that is what I often work with companies on, is if you actually have this new technology available to you and a new way of doing things and you really want to get the value out of it, embedding it in this process, crazy process that you already have is not going to get any of the value. If you want people to innovate with this new thing, the only way that you can do it is by shaving off all of the unnecessary parts of it and reducing risk in other ways and letting them go crazy and, you know, use their creativity to explore the new technology that's available to you. So I charge you all. If you're managing people, managing in an organization, and you actually want to get the value out of all these wonderful new technologies that we have, please think about what the context is in which you're using it. It's not a technology problem, or at least the technology problem is the easy part. It's a problem of how you set yourself up by throwing rocks in your backpack, and maybe you need to take off the backpack. So give it a try. Thank you all for listening.